Welcome, everybody. I'm Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator here at Colorado Photographic Arts Center. We are a nonprofit photography center, and we put on exhibitions like this every 6 weeks. Welcome to Western Cowboy Reloaded. This exhibition features 6 Colorado photographers, 3 of which are here today for this panel, and we will be having another program on May 27th with the other 3 artists, and also an online program next Saturday on the 16th. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about the show, that each artist offers a distinct visual entry point. So intimate portraits of riders and wranglers, quiet studies of materials and landscape, stark silhouettes, cultural traditions, and the raw physicality of rodeo culture. Moving past nostalgia, these artists invite viewers to reconsider whose stories define the West and how those stories continue to unfold. And this exhibition was also organized in conjunction with Colorado's 150th anniversary of statehood and the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And it offers an opportunity to reflect on the histories and cultural influences that continue to inform the mythology of the American West. I want to thank Mad Agriculture and Jonnah for being here and helping us put on this programming, and Land Library as well. We'll have some introductions from them as well. And then a huge thank you to our exhibition sponsors, Melissa Chiong, a trustee at Bonfi Stanton Foundation, Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Morgan Family Legacy Foundation, and the W.C. and E.J. Thornton Foundation. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm Jonnah Perkins from Mad Agriculture, and I'm the media director. Mad is a nonprofit based in Boulder, Colorado, and we work with farmers and ranchers across the country to support on farm level through economic support, financing, education, and just navigating the challenges that are inherent to the agriculture industry. And something else that we do at MAD that's different from other agricultural nonprofits is we truly believe that storytelling and art is integral to revolutionizing agriculture. So we do this through several ways. We have a biannual print publication, and we actually have several here that we invite you to take with you when you leave today. We also direct and produce short films, and we do a lot of in-person activations like what we're doing today, because we truly believe that storytelling is what shapes culture. And so I'm going to pass it over to Ben from Land Library, and he's going to share a little bit more about what he's brought with him today in the back. And we'll have some time to look at that after the panel discussion.
Thanks. My name is Ben. I'm with the Land Library. So we're a nonprofit based here in Denver and also Park County, which is about 2 hours west of Denver. So our mission is to nurture the human spirit through nature, community, and books. So we have 50,000 books that are focused on natural history, the West, and that encompasses everything from photography, of course, to land art, fishing, railroads, indigenous food practices, poetry, anything that's has to do with nature and how humans interact with it. So right now we're rehabilitating one of the oldest ranches in Colorado. That's 2 hours west of Denver. There's 10 buildings across about 36 acres. And so our vision is basically to put our 50,000 books in those 10 buildings at the ranch, create a nature library, artist retreat. And one of the primary goals we have in general and at the ranch is to tell the kind of rich cultural histories that are part of the land there. So there's ranching history, certainly cowboy culture, women in ranching. The ranch was started by a woman in the 1860s from France. Indigenous history going back at least 10,000 years. There's actually some really fascinating artifacts on site at the ranch that date back 10,000 years. And also things like water in the West, especially with climate change, our current drought. What we hope people do when they go to the ranch is slow down, engage with nature closely, the printed page, other people, and kind of promote our understanding of how to be better stewards of the land. So we have a few books on the table in the back, small selection of our collection, a few photo books. That's kind of the focus for today. And then we have some summer programs up at the ranch. Check that out on our website and Instagram. Thanks to Samantha and her team at CPAC, John and her team at MadAg, and the artists for a beautiful exhibit. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Ben. Okay, so I just want to share with you how we're going to run our conversation today. So I'd love for each of the artists to introduce themselves and to orient us to which area of the gallery your work is exhibited in, and just share more about your background as a photographer. And then we'd love to save questions for the end. So we're going to have a pretty open conversation up here around several different kind of themes and subject matter. And we're just going to pass the mic around, and we'd love for you to join in at the end of our session.
Hi, everybody. My name's Rob Hammer. I'm a photographer. I live up in Longmont. This is my work here. I've been a photographer for about 20 years, and it's been quite a ride. I started out in commercial photography, doing a lot of stuff for sports and fitness, and kind of hated it. So I started migrating towards things that I really connected with. And long story short, it kind of led me to this after kind of falling in love with the land all across the West. And about 6 years ago, I started documenting working cowboys all over the West, everywhere from Texas to Montana and everywhere in between. And it's just been a incredibly rewarding and humbling experience to kind of have access to to be granted access to their lives. They're incredibly private people, but they're also, once you kind of break down that wall, they're just really, really inviting and just phenomenal people. So that's where I am, and probably will never stop this project.
My name is Ian, and my work is the work over here. I'm mostly a commercial photographer. I shoot a lot of just like everything home, and I do this stuff as my personal work. So I explore a lot of like community and just cultural stories. My great grandfather and grandfather were both rodeo cowboys. So that's kind of how this project came to be, just kind of continuing that legacy.
Hi, my name's Jack Ludlam. My work is on the far wall over here in the oak frames. I've been a photographer full time now for, I think, 8 years, with a real focus on still life studies. Lately, I've really been fascinated, though, with more full immersive studies of ranches and areas. So I've been focusing more on landscape, still life, but a lot of the work that I've been focusing on for the last few years has been very much involved with building sets on location at ranches, and really trying to elevate and show what people do and how they work and the materials that they work with every day, and kind of illuminate and simplify things and reduce atmospheric perspective to leave you to appreciate one thing at a time. I've been focusing on that for a while, but as time goes on, I think I just want to keep kind of exploring different cultures within ranching. I think as long as I'm spending time outside with animals, I'm happy, and I just love learning how differently people work with the land all across the states as well as outside of the states. So I just want to continue learning. Yeah, I think I just want to continue to keep learning more and exploring more of these different ranching cultures, traditions, work processes, and continue to show them in a unique way where we can really appreciate things one thing at a time.
Thank you. I'll share a little bit more about myself as well and the context that I have around agriculture and art. I married into one of the largest organic direct-to-consumer vegetable farms in the upper Midwest. It was the largest in the country at the time that I joined the family farm. So I have a deep experience in production agriculture, both with vegetables and also small livestock operations, hogs, cattle, and some poultry. And so I did that for a little over a decade, and I got involved with the outdoor industry in front of the camera. I was a competitive mountain runner, and I became completely captivated by the media space. And so my work with Mad Agriculture comes from an agricultural lens, but also with this passion and love for just the broader landscapes of nature and natural resources that both agriculture and recreation share. So the proximity that I have to farmers and ranchers feels very different than how a lot of media approaches farmers, which is very separate. I definitely relate to the farmer more than I relate to the media side of it. So with that, I'd like to pose the first question here, which is, When you think about the image of a cowboy that most people carry, what feels true about your experience and what feels constructed or incomplete?
I guess I would say that it's in the context of what I do, I strictly focus on working cowboys. When you look around the room, everything, this is such a great exhibit because it's so diverse, all the different cultures that it shows within the cowboy culture. I focus on working cowboys, so that's really all that I can speak to. And I think that in general, what I always tell people is that cowboys are kind of the exact opposite of what they think they are. Everything that you see in movies and everything that you see in TV shows is constructed. It's dramatic. It's for entertainment. But real cowboys they're just phenomenal people. They're just really, really great human beings that do what they do because they love it. And, there's nothing else that they would rather do. Um, it's a 365-day a year job that can never, ever, ever turn off. If you're ranching up in Montana and it's minus 50 degrees for a week, you can't just say, I'll get to it later. It just doesn't work like that because the cows will die. And, there's the reverse too. In the summer, if it's 100 degrees for a month straight, it doesn't matter. You still got to go out and work. So, they're just a unbelievably dedicated, passionate group of people that, I mean, sure, they're tough. They're no doubt about it. They are really, really tough people. But once I think, kind of like I already said, once you kind of get past that wall, they're the best people that you could ever be around. They'll invite you into their home to stay there. They'll feed you whatever it is. They're just awesome humans.
I think rodeos are a little different in that almost everything is constructed. Um, it's rodeos are about keeping the tradition of the West alive. So from the dress code of rodeos to the gear the cowboys use is all um, not out of convenience, but out of tradition. So yeah, it's a lot of constructed environment and representing something that is no longer a normal thing. So yeah, there is a lot of constructed stuff, but I think what I try to do with my work is get past that and try to get to know the athletes and try to get like up and close with them and take portraits that hopefully shows a little bit something beyond being a cowboy. So like staring into their eyes and yeah, seeing something else. Because a lot of the cowboys I work with they're ranch hands, or they work on ranches, but then a lot of them are construction workers and of just other stuff and they do rodeos to make extra money during the summer or just because they love it. So yeah, it's a little different than working cowboys, but I think pretty cool. Yeah.
I think as far as like the traditional like iconography of what it is to be a Western cowboy has been a really interesting thing for me to interact with over the last few years. When I started interacting with working cowboys, ranchers, ranch hands, I think I had a very specific visual expectation of what they would gravitate towards, how they would dress, how they would want to be shown, and all of these things. And I really had to learn that um, not only does everyone want to be shown so individually, but everyone has their own way of working and their own ethics within the way they work with the animals. And it's just really fascinating to learn what people want to show, what people want put out there when they're ranchers. And then there's this harsher side, right? Like this is brutal work and it's hard work and there are ugly parts of it. But I also think that like within those ugly kind of brutal parts, there's this conviction that lasts within ranching that sees the greater ideals if you are working ethically with animals that can see the potential for greater good. And I love trying to show that, but there is dirt in that, and there's grit in that, and there's blood in that. And that has been a challenge for me to figure out how you want to show that in a way that can be appreciated without instantly recognizing it as, brutal or too intense of an image to really interact with it in that way. So one thing that I recognized the last time I was out on a ranch for a branding day was one of the older cowboys, Dale, that I was working with. He had blood all over his hands all day. And I just, the way that blood dried was so beautiful, but there's so much weight in that. And there's discomfort in that. And I think that showing things in a little bit more of a simple format can hopefully show things in a way that's a little bit less intense, and people can process the harsher side of things without it being so overwhelming.
So I'm going to build on what you just said around physicality. So the photography that the three of you do is inherently, it's dangerous. Like the proximity to animals, the proximity to, unpredictable physical experiences, and also just like getting out there in some cases, like especially Rob, I'm looking at your work, like you really had to have the comfort level of like being way out there. So how does like the athleticism or physicality of creating your work land with you? Like how do you tell us more about like what that means for you in your work?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but the physicality part is something I think I'm kind of addicted to, because they're long days. If you wanna really photograph cowboys the way that they should, or at least the way that I think that they should be photographed, you need to be out there with them, and that means that, that could be 10 miles, 20 miles from base camp, and the only way to get there is on a horse or to walk, which I do both. And once you automatic, that's baseline. You have to be out there, and then you add weather on top of that, and then you add in 1,500-pound animals that have an opinion. It can get really, really weird. It's something that I still kind of admire is people don't understand that just the factor of the horse. It's not like getting into a car and driving. Horses have opinions. They have bad days. They get pissed off, and that can lead to really, really bad injuries. So just stepping onto a horse can go very, very wrong, and it could go wrong in the corrals by the barn, or it could go really wrong 20 miles away from the barn, and there's no way to get, you can't just rush an ambulance out there to get somebody to the hospital. Yeah, I mean, you sign up for it. You have to be willing to get hurt. You have to be willing to get your ass kicked every day, pretty much, whether that's just physically getting there, doing the work, being around the work, dealing with the animals. The cows can be incredibly unpredictable. So it's all of it. That aspect, I would say, is everything that people kind of think of as the rough part of it, and the physicality. But there's also that balance of the beautiful sunset or the campfire or whatever. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong every single day when you're dealing with animals, and you just have to kind of love it, or don't get involved. That answer your question? Okay.
Um, I think to like go off of that, it's kind of funny because rodeos are forcing those bad days to happen. Um, like rodeo started out of cowboys breaking horses and just, yeah, like competing just on ranches. So yeah, became something where you're forcing the animal to have a bad day. Um, and so I don't fear as much for myself as I do for like the cowboys that I see regularly, and all that. I think for me, since I'm not like riding out into the wilderness on a horse, the hardest part for me of this project is the kind of like emotional aspect of putting yourself out there and asking people to take their picture is, for me at least, extremely difficult. Um, so yeah, I think for me, as far as like that danger that you're putting yourself in, that's my like take on it and involvement in the whole process. Because when it comes to like being around bulls and stuff, I fear more for my like cameras than myself. So yeah, I think that's the hardest part when it comes.
Physicality in work is super important to me. Like growing up in Ohio, I grew up outside all the time, and my favorite thing in the world was just digging holes and building forts. Like that was the best thing ever. And I think genuinely that fascination of just like physicality in work has been something that I've always been interested in. And specifically that plays out in ways as far as specifically this work, as far as the backdrops go, it's a way of showing your involvement. So what I try to do is I try to always offer ranch hand work in exchange for access for photos, and that willingness of being willing to get your hands dirty and not just showing up to take the photo and then go back has been something that's really helped me to not only feel like, hey, I'm providing these people with something they might not have otherwise, but also they understand that I like getting my hands dirty and I just like helping out and I really enjoy that. So I think the physicality of work for me has been something that I've always had this romantic idea of what it is to be a cowboy. And of course, there's part of like 12-year-old me that's like, I want to be a cowboy, So I really do like being involved. And it's really, really fun for me physically learning processes. That's the way that I've always learned best. So I really do enjoy the physicality, the building of the backdrops, the building the photo as opposed to the more taking of the photo and completely constructing something is super fun for me.
Okay, so this is a question for Samantha and Ben around curation and editing. And I would like for you each to talk about, in a sea of possibilities with like endless options, how have you chosen what you've chosen? And Samantha, that could be like for this particular show or just in your work in general. Like how do you choose what you choose? And then you can build on that just around like how is the land library choosing titles that it chooses?
I'll go first and try to be quick. Um, I think our co-founders, they were a married couple that worked at Tattered Cover, and he was the bargain book buyer. So he would basically buy books for Tattered Cover and then buy some for the land library. So in some ways, there was not probably a lot of curation. It was really anything to do with nature, which, if you think about that in an expansive way, it could be almost anything. If you think about humans, we are part of the world in a very simple, literal way, but can get very complex and interesting. That made your question made me think about a lot of things, but as a nonprofit, strategically, what do you choose to do? What do you focus on? But then more so, especially at the ranch, there's a tension between indigenous history, ranching history. And you think about ranching history going back 200, 300 years, the Homestead Act, the history we have at the ranch of a French family pursuing the American dream, starting the ranch during, the Civil War, the Lincoln presidency. So there's all that beautiful, at times also, like Jack said, intense, bloody, tough, violent history, including some of the, colonialism um, that's happened in this country with indigenous nations and tribes. So for us, that's something we're still very much, I think, humbly trying to think about how to use our book collection, which does start, to our founders' credit, with diversity in terms of Spanish language collection, indigenous history, very intentionally, but that's always an ongoing question of who gets to tell history, how do you tell it? So we're thinking about that for programs that we do each summer at the ranch, authors that we try to engage with to do author talks, fundraising, to try to do that in a really ethical, healthy, expansive way, to respectfully sort of elevate some of those stories that are literally kind of present at the ranch. So in terms of kind of curation, thinking about how to what you're using your organization or your place in the community to elevate certain people's voices, I think is a big obligation, one that we take seriously. And that's, this exhibit, the artists, what Mad Ag does, all very much aligns with our goals and pursuing all of that.
So, in terms of curation, I'll speak specifically to this show. I tend to curate small group shows like this. We do have solo shows. Our last exhibit was 2 solo exhibitions, but I do like to do exhibitions like this to put work into conversation. So to bring artists together that maybe don't know each other or aren't familiar with each other's work, and then usually around some sort of theme or topic, so that there's a larger conversation, more room for dialogue. Um, and I always start my process. I mean, a lot of these photographers I've known in different capacities, different projects that they've done for years. And so it's just, I call it the Rolodex in my brain, that I keep all this kind of like work that I'm thinking about and all these curation ideas I have. And so that's where I kind of started with this. And then it's reaching out to each artist, talking about what work is available. Um, and then I build from there. And I'm very visual and clearly. And so I I print out little copies of things and literally lay things out on think about, okay, there's this much work, this size, it can fit on, where each wall. And so that's what we end up with. What you see here is that each artist has an area of the gallery so that their work can really speak to the project and the work that they're making, but then also still be in a broader conversation with the other artists in the exhibition. So um, it takes time to think about, and I kind of build and then talk back with, reconnect with the artist. Okay, what about this? How many, how large, how many pieces can we fit? So that's kind of how I put all of this together. And then we get it all here, and then it gets on the wall.
I want to bring that question down to the photographers as well, and slightly different, but every photographer has like a different shooting style. Some photographers shoot, thousands of files and edit and come away with a huge edit. Some, during certain projects, maybe you're just looking for one very specific photo. But how do you choose? What is your shooting style, and how do you choose what to leave out? And what is that process like for you?
I would say photographers are absolutely horrific at editing and curating, and they should not be allowed to do it themselves. And I think because we're too attached to the work. And if you've ever worked with a curator or an editor, you learn so much so quickly because they're professional and they're not emotional and they're not biased. I love book publishing, and when I started working with an editor on a book, it was an incredible thing because almost instantly she threw out all of my favorite photographs, and I'm like, these are the best ones. The book is gonna suck. What are you doing? But then when you hear the explanation, it makes a lot of sense because it's not about, like Jack might think that this is his best photograph right here. But if that photograph doesn't work in a book or in a show, collectively, it doesn't matter. Um, I always kind of relate it to music, where if you're making a rap album or a country album, you don't throw a heavy metal song right in the middle of the album. It just doesn't make any sense. It's got to be really cohesive. But as far as the shooting style, uh, I've learned to I always used to show up to a ranch and I had all these ideas in my head. Now, I want to get this, and this. And you realize really quickly that the second you get there, that just all goes out the door because it's not available or the weather sucks or the animals aren't cooperating, so you have to be really, really open to whatever happens. You can't be so strict to force things to happen because it doesn't work. So that, I guess, has kind of really changed the way that I shoot. But I think the curation part is entirely dependent on what the goal is. Again, I love making books, but what I would put in a book is not what I'm going to put on the wall in a gallery. Because if it was really gritty or more on the brutal side, number one, no one's going to want to buy it and put it on their wall, and it just wouldn't make sense. So you have to really think about where it's going to live, and that will kind of determine how you choose. But again, I don't think you should. I don't think a photographer should do it on their own. I think they should always have an outside opinion to tell them what sucks or what works. What get rid of this, keep that. So yeah, I think it should be a team effort.
Yeah, I agree with Rob that like it's really hard to edit down work that you feel so emotionally connected to. And yeah, I coming from the commercial world and especially shooting architecture, I'm very used to having a very specific shot list. And I think that carries into my personal work. I like to tell people that I shoot digital as if I'm shooting film. I don't take thousands of pictures. Uh, I I'll go to a rodeo with a picture in mind. And if I get that picture, sometimes I'll just leave. And I definitely like plan what I want in my head. And I know like this rodeo is situated in this like pine tree forest, and a picture from really far back would look really cool. So I go and get that picture, and then I'll stick around for a little bit to see if anything like spontaneously happens. Um, but yeah, so I don't end up with a lot of pictures. I think editing out, um, for me, like my passive editing comes down to like what I want people to perceive of a rodeo. I've taken plenty of pictures where like I took this picture of this group of fans, and I was really stoked about it. But one of the guys was flashing this like hand symbol, and I had like no idea what it was. And I got home, looked at it, and researched it, and it was like the symbol for white power. Um, and that's just something that I didn't want people to perceive the rodeo as. And so maybe like I don't know if it's ethical, but it's not like purely documentary work, so I think it's fine. But like choosing not to even show that photo um, is a pretty weighted editing choice, I feel like. And then after that, I'll send the work to my editor, and they'll be like, "So this is everything you got?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, pretty much." Um, and but yeah, I think when it comes to a book, you need those boring pictures or those gritty pictures to move the book along. Um, but in a gallery setting, you need showstoppers because people tend to not actually look at your work very long. So they're especially not going to look at like a shot that is just shows like hoof prints in the dirt. So yeah, it's definitely like for two different venues, you make different edits.
For me, reducing work or like coming down to the, final favorite images that you want to produce and you want to physicalize and make real and frame. I had a really dedicated focus to film photography when I was studying in college, and that taught me to be really not only resourceful with how I'm producing work because it costs money to produce the work, but it also made me really, really start thinking about, when I make an exposure, what I'm trying to do, and it makes for me, I'm shooting a lot on medium format film, sometimes medium format digital, but that medium format film is kind of this perfect work balance of I can work quickly enough that I'm not missing a lot of opportunities, but it slows me down enough to force me to think about shots. One thing I've really been trying to do lately is I can kind of get stuck in those roles where you do get so obsessed with an idea before you get there, and I can definitely get in the mind space of, well, if I don't get that idea, then what the hell am I doing here? And I get really overwhelmed and confused. One thing I've been trying really intentionally to do is just be a little bit more playful, and when you show up and that shot that you were going for isn't happening, being able to pivot and being a little bit more playful and taking shots that otherwise I might not think to take. But I am lucky. I don't have to cull through thousands of images. Usually when I go do a shoot, I mean, if I shoot 5 rolls of film, that was a huge day, and maybe 50 digital images, that's a big day. So I'm lucky in the sense that my workflow has never dictated shooting tons and tons of photos. I think that would be a very difficult thing to process through. So
Okay, so this question is for Ben and Samantha. So you both create containers of emotion. Like that is what you're doing. You're building emotional experiences, and that emotion has to pass through you first, before it can be shared and filled. Um, what does success look like for you in terms of creating an experience or a body of work, um, that can be, on the one hand, like very uplifting, but also troubling, like balancing all of the range of emotions that we want people to feel. And you mentioned some of like the troubling historical past that the West has. But what is, and maybe you haven't achieved this full amount of success, but what does that mean for you in like instilling a range of emotions in your audience and whoever passes through your space?
This is a simple question, so I'll let Samantha take it first.
I would say that for how people experience, to me, it's that people are coming in and engaging with the work, not just looking at the statements, but also, spending time with the images, maybe having questions for myself or my team, that the people are learning from it, that they can come to panels like this or listen to us afterwards and get more perspective about how the artists are speaking about their work or feel about their work, or that people are seen, that when they come into the space, they are seen when they see the pictures on the wall, they see themselves in those pictures. All of that is really important. And I think we do that through the various exhibitions we put on throughout the year, because there is such a wide range of work that we show here. Um, and it's important to me as a former educator that people feel comfortable coming in and having conversation and engaging, and we try to create that space through text, through booklets, through ways that people, they don't have to ask questions right away. They can just pick up materials and start to engage with the work. But I want people to feel seen when they come into the space, and I see that time and again with our exhibitions, and it's really rewarding.
Oh, yeah, really good question. It's interesting. I think we think of ourselves, library, books, you think of intellectual, cerebral pursuit, which I think very much describes me, our board, a lot of people attracted to the project. So that's a great question, thinking about like the emotional side of it. I think that to me resonates with our vision and what we're already practicing at the ranch. The real benefit, and why, I took this job and feel passionate about the land library, have been involved for a decade, is because I think there's real increasing value in slowing down and, deep communion with nature, the natural world. And that can be in your backyard, drinking coffee in the morning. That can be taking a hike. There's lots of different expressions of that I think are beautiful. One of those is certainly we believe at the ranch, which is kind of cinematically gorgeous in a lot of ways, probably plays into the myth making, iconography of the West. It's a high mountain grassland. It's at 9,200 feet. It's just beautiful. So I think everybody who goes there, feels that. The South Platte River is on the border of the ranch, so there's sage that you can smell as soon as you get out of your car. So there's all these kind of sensual experiences at the ranch in that space that I associate more with emotional experience. So it's that, and then it's the value of combining that with maybe the more thoughtful, but could be emotional, printed page. Back to the physicality question, engaging with the real physical book, in our age of lots of stimulating things, the addictive nature of social media, reduced attention spans. I have a 12-year-old kid thinking about their future of all of that. There's real value in slowing down with nature, with books and other people. Kind of to what Samantha said too about being seen, different communities, identities that we all have in general in the West, gathering diverse people. We've had some really interesting weekends where we have, for example, like water as a theme, and you have visual artists who focus on water. You have hydrologists who study it from a very technical, scientific perspective. And it's fascinating hearing these people talk about the same general topic, coming at it from totally different perspectives, and then picking a book, that relates to all of that. So I think that's probably at the emotional and intellectual kind of core of what we hope the experience will be with the land library and at the ranch.
Amazing. So I want to talk about trust and access and proximity that you have with your subject matter, and whether that's like portraiture or animals or access to private property or landscapes. What is your process and feelings around trust? And I mean, there's so much beautiful portraiture in all of this. Like, how do you do that? Like, what is your process with gaining trust of your subject matter? Are there any spots that are really tough for you, or is there any way that it's surprisingly like easy for you or like a natural part of your talent?
Getting the access, I think, was the hardest part, and that took a really, really long time, because cowboys sort of live invisible lives. They're very detached from the rest of society, and when you decide to do a project like this, you can't just flip open the yellow pages and oh, how do I find a cowboy? Well, let me call a cowboy. It just doesn't work like that. So I mean, it took me years, I think, to finally um, get in, and that's a whole other funny story. But I met it. It started with this one person that I met, and talked to him and told him what I was doing, and they said, next month we got a branding at our house. You're welcome to come. And these were there was a young couple, family ranch that, they had a couple hundred head of cows, and I went and uh, didn't screw it up too bad, apparently, and this was 6 or so years ago, and I'm still really, really good friends with them. Um, so really, I mean, everything kind of started with them, which I'm really, really grateful for. But the amazing thing about the cowboy community is that it's so, as big as the West is, the cowboy community is very, very small. And a cowboy in Texas knows a cowboy in Montana, and a cowboy in Montana knows a guy in Nevada who knows a guy here, 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 and here. So that initial trust was the biggest thing. And then when they realize that you're in it for the right reasons and you're not trying to screw them over, they're more than happy to give you someone else's phone number or say, hey, contact this guy, or however it works. They will connect the dots for you because they trust that you're doing the right thing, and they know that you're on their side. But it was really, really difficult. And now I'm grateful that, I mean, I could drive around just about any state in the West and call somebody and say, hey man, I'm in the area. You mind if I stop by? Yeah, shit. Yeah. Come on, stay at my house. Whatever it is, they're, they're just when they trust you, they're just unbelievably welcoming people. Um, As far as the, the weaker, I guess the weaker points was your question, was portraiture has been always been kind of a weaker point for me, and I don't know what that is, but it's no less fun, because I think, like this guy here, it's like it's just you're one on one, you're very close, and you're kind of sharing a moment or whatever it is, some kind of chemistry, and that's been a much weaker point for me than just sort of being that fly on the wall. Most of what I do is just fly on the wall. You're just there. You're not getting in the way. You're trying not to get in the way. You're just there. It's like you almost don't even exist. But yeah, that again, does that answer your question?
I think I yeah, I think like I said earlier, the hardest part for me is approaching people. Um, but and with access, like you can just like email the rodeo organizer and ask to come, and if you have like a body of work to show them and show that you're not trying to like exploit the rodeo or something malicious, they usually invite you to come. Um, I think as far as trust, like I personally don't talk a lot, and people, because of that, seem to want to open up to me and tell me their life story. Um, and so I think that's how I build trust with cowboys, especially. They're like, this guy is like, he wants to like hear from me and listen to me. So I show up to rodeos early and I just talk to the cowboys while they're getting ready, and just build that rapport and just listen. And then by the time that I ask them to take their picture, they're like, okay, this guy's like cool and he's here for the right reasons and he's genuine. And that allows me to take intimate portraits and with like a sort of wide lens, get very close to them. And even if they are having a bad day or had a bad ride, they I've built this rapport with them and trust with them that they know that I'm gonna take a good picture of them, um, and show them in the best light that I can. And yeah, I think that goes a long way with cowboys. That are cowboys in general are pretty straightforward and to the point. So if you can just show that and appreciate that, then they're very happy to have you and have their picture taken.
I would say trust with my work has become a lot more of like a significant focus of mine over the last 3 years. A couple of years ago, I was pretty much entirely bringing work to my studio. I was inviting people to my space, and that was a way I worked that I felt very comfortable and in control. Um, a few years ago, I lost my studio space, and I didn't have a place to work, and I ended up bringing the work to these ranches, and it was uncomfortable, but it was one of the best things I ever did. And a big part of that, talking back to the physicality, is really that willingness to show up, and that willingness, one of the first ranches I worked with was Eagle Rock Ranch. They run cattle. And, one of the first things the first time I showed up there and I had never met anyone before was we just started working on their culvert because they were working on drainage, and it's really showing that willingness to say, like, as you said, it's 365, 24/7, right? Like they can't stop working if the drainage stops. So the best thing for me to do when I show up, even if I'm trying to get photos that day, is join in on helping the drainage, because then we can get it done faster if they see that I'm willing to get dirty and get involved, and it does help build trust. But I think kind of everywhere, every ranch that I've been to has been different, and certain families are a lot more willing to open up in larger ways, and some people are much more willing to just open up in smaller ways and just show you their work and maybe not their personal lives. But trust has become a really big thing, and everyone that I work with, I try my absolute best to have a continued relationship with. I also try to give artwork back to the communities that I'm producing it in. So that's a big continuation of that trust, and trying to make sure people know that I'm not just one and done and then I'm out.
I think like another thing on trust is um, knowing what to ask for. I think that like, I'm sure all three of us can agree that there's a certain point where you're asking too much of someone, and that kind of breaks down the trust that you work so hard to get. So I think there is that balance and being aware that there is a line, that even if you seem like best friends with someone, there's a line that you don't want to cross and ask for too much. So I think it's also just being aware of that and yeah, just knowing where that is.
I'd also add that there's a lot of no's. There's people who absolutely say no. I had one in Nevada about a month ago. It was a really, really historic ranch that I've been wanting to photograph forever because they're such a huge piece of Nevada ranching culture. And the guy said, absolutely not. I don't know if it was necessarily a trust thing, but he's like, I just want to be left alone. Not interested. So yeah, they're not all yeses.
I'd like to talk about the aesthetic of the West and like the endless appeal of the aesthetic. And we see it across the world. I mean, like Beyonce, every, singer has their Western era, Madonna, Post Malone, we were just talking about. Um, and it has a global appeal, and there's so much romanticism and nostalgia and mystique around it. How do you engage with that aesthetic? And this can be for this, all of you up here are engaging with it um, through this show, through the land library. Like it's easy to sell. People want it, people judge it. But how do you engage with it in your work, whether that's through a photo, through even the desire to photograph the historic ranch? Um, and yeah, I would just like to hear all of you talk about how you're engaging with the Western aesthetic. And we can go in any order.
Yeah, that's another great question. I think of authenticity and the last question about trust. I mean, that's something we're doing in a similar, it's all about personal relationships that you all described. Especially for us, most of us are in Denver, the Front Range, engaging with Park County, very small towns. Fairplay is less than 1,000 people. The ranching history is very strong and still active up there in the South Park Basin. So that's something that's, we're learning more and more about. It's very important building that trust. And part of that is, like many of you touched on, the idea of giving back to the community. So we started partnering with local nonprofits, being a public resource to the community eventually there as a library. Authenticity, I mean, some of us, lots of us have boots on. I think about the cowboy hat, the aesthetics of it. Who's allowed to do that? There's some element of self-conscious cosplay, I think, for some of us. And, people that are from the city going out to a more rural area. So I'm sure all of you probably have maybe more direct experience and thoughts about that in terms of how you're showing that in imagery. I think for us, again, it comes back to the books, and trying to be as much as we can, a big tent, a place for everybody, all identities. And I do think a lot about the indigenous history and kind of the cowboy culture. We have a book back there about Black cowboys. Obviously, some of the images here are beyond maybe what the Hollywood depiction is of cowboy culture. So I think it's, as soon as you go kind of one layer deep in a book collection and imagery, engaging with the community, you realize there's all these different versions of it that can be a lot more interesting if you kind of dive down beyond just the imagery aesthetics of it. But it can also be a really fun pull in for people to have fun and then engage on a deeper level.
I think this is probably something that all photographers struggle with all the time. And the best answer that I've been able to come up with is what do you want to put out into the world? If you think about your collective body of work in 20 or 30 or 100 years, what does that show? What does that represent? Like what part of Western culture and what take on cowboys do you want to put out there? Because it would be really, you as a photographer, it would be, your career would be a lot easier if you didn't care. You know what I mean? Because it's, in my opinion, it's really easy to make beautiful pictures of the West because it is so beautiful, and just the cowboy is an icon. in a way, it's if you're there and you have the access, you can make a beautiful photo that could sell, but I mean, for me, I want to show more of the reality of it, the more authentic, like what do they actually do? And again, that's because I focus on working cowboys, but I really want to show the reality. So, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of photos on my hard drive that could be really popular or sell or whatever, but that's not what I want to put out into the world, and that's not the image that I want to portray.
Yeah, I think going back to what I said earlier, like rodeos are very much um a portrayal of what the West used to be, and they're trying to construct this environment where you get to experience that. A lot of people, like I have a lot of pictures of fans just dressed up in their best like Western gear. So there is a little bit of that cowboy cosplay. Um, that but it's in an environment where it's almost expected. Like I've been to rodeos. I went to one rodeo and there was like an athlete meeting before the rodeo, and the announcer, like organizer, told all the athletes like if you're wearing a short sleeve shirt, go change into a long sleeve shirt. You're not a farmer. Um, wear wear a cowboy hat. And I've almost been kicked out of rodeos because I wasn't wearing a cowboy hat. So I think the environment that I'm shooting in is trying to preserve that kind of like Hollywood um, portrayal of the West. And it's expected that if you're there, you're going to be a part of supporting that. So I think for me, like it's in that environment, it's really hard to get past that and um, try to show the people as just people. And they're, so it's like obviously it's cowboys dressed up in this like very decorative and kind of like eye catching um, clothes. But I want to show through posing, through the way I tell them to look at me, through how close I get to them, that there is a person behind all this decoration. So yeah, I think that's I don't know. Is that okay?
When I think about, continuing to work on this body of work and the imagery and the aesthetic of it, this is still, fairly early on for me in this process. I've only been working directly with ranches for a few years now. And I think the thing that has amazed me the most is the diversity. And I haven't built a portfolio that represents that entire thing yet. And I think really I'll never be able to, you can't cover everything. But for me, I think there's just so much diversity within ranching, and I think there's so many unique stories within these ranches. And I think like each ranch, especially these, 3, 4 generation familial ranches, they inherently have so much history and so much uniqueness to them, just having survived that long and been through the Great Depression and been through all of these, natural disasters, been through events like that. The land has changed so much, but the conviction to stay within their work and continue to grow and adapt is really what amazes me. And what continues to fascinate me is how much of a spectrum that is, and how differently people work with the land, how differently people work with animals, and not that one is right or wrong, but they're just all unique. And I would feel irresponsible only showing one version of that. So I think for me, it's just a growing continuation of diverse ranching practices that I want to be interested in and continue to show different aesthetics that all exist within one kind of common community.
I mean, in curating this exhibition, I thought a lot about the myth of the West, the cowboy, but also how cowboys are represented through rodeo, through Mexican rodeo, the escaramuza. So there were lots of things I wanted to bring into conversation. Having all kind of contemporary artists was important as well. I mean, being in Colorado, there obviously are so many people that could have been included in this exhibition, but it was intentional in the ones that I selected. So yeah, but those were all things I was thinking about as I put this together, how to push those boundaries, how to bring about that conversation. But I think, there's always more to talk about.
Okay, I'm going to pose one last big question, and this is for anyone up here. But if someone were to look at your work or your body of work in 20 years from now, what impression would you hope they have of this moment of 2025, 2026, or whatever year your work was created in? And Ben, for you, that could be like the birth of Land Library. And where do you see it in 20 years, or how do you hope people are seeing that? And then for the artists, looking at these collections specifically, what do you hope someone in 20 years would take away from this time in history? And Samantha, this could be anything expansive about CPAC or this particular show.
Thanks. That's a hard question. I'm not sure that I know how to answer that. Because really, when you put the work out into the world, and everyone has their own opinion. You can't change what people think when they look at your photos, whether it's 1 foot or an entire body of work. But the hope is that it does the cowboy culture justice, really, and people look at it and say, "Oh, this was done in a real way. These are real cowboys. These are their real lives. This is what they do day to day. This isn't a photo workshop. This isn't a stage scene to create what cowboys are supposed to look like, you know?" But more importantly, I think all these people in the photographs they're human beings, they are people who dedicated their lives to cowboying. And now, in this particular part of life. And, the cowboys have been documented for so long because they're such fascinating people, but it's still, I think, really important to document the people that are doing now, is just like it'll be really important to document the people that are doing after, you know? So, I think it's just making a meaningful contribution, I think is the main thing.
I just totally agree with that. I think I want people to look back and see the humanity in it. I think it's very easy to come to a rodeo with opinions one way or the other about rodeos. And so very like supportive or not so supportive. Um, and I've very deliberately chosen to show the rodeo as this very nostalgic Western vision. There's a lot of different ways this project could have gone, to be more political or more critical. But that's something that I think about when shooting this stuff, is what will someone think 20 years from now? And that's someone else's job to say what was politically happening 20 years ago. But I think my job is to show the humanity in it all. In my project, I take a lot of action shots and I have some really good ones, but it's not about the action of a rodeo. It's more about the men and women who are participating and the people that are there. And so, yeah, I want people to look back and see the people and kind of with curiosity and about what that life was like. And yeah, I think just, I don't know, nostalgia is a big thing in all of my work. And so I want people to look back at that with rose-colored glasses, kind of. Yeah.
I want to be really clear that I have not even come close to accomplishing this goal yet. But I think in 20 years, I would really love to have a large body of work that is really representative of different work cultures all across North America. I spent a decent amount of time up in the Pacific Northwest and in some of the logging towns that provided so much lumber for World War One, and you learn about the history there, and you see everyone's grandfather's chainsaw hanging up in the house, and I started photographing those chainsaws, and I think that inherently wherever we are, there's trade that comes along with that, and there's ways that people have found to work with, or in certain cases work against the land. It's just fascinating to be able to study that. And I think that there is over time becoming more immersed in this world, I'll feel more comfortable working directly with portraiture and involving more identity in it. And I hope that in 20 years, there's, a really large body of work that is reflective of tangible work processes across the United States, and being able to identify like, oh man, people in the West really seem to gravitate towards this kind of equipment that they work with, and these types of horses and these type of aesthetics, and being able to really kind of look at that on a larger scale and be able to kind of see and understand how people's work really affects that community, and how they choose to interact with the land, and what they choose to produce or what they've been given to produce really affects culture locally. And so I would just live to be able to document snapshots of that over time, and really give people a sense of what kind of industry came out of these people, and how did people survive, and how did they work the land? What did they work with? That's something I have fun thinking about a lot.
I think about, I want people to look back and think about the work that was done, what these artists documented, what they had to say about what was happening kind of at this time. Things will change and not change. The myth of the West, things have continued to change, but people still, they're cowboys and rodeo, and all of these traditions still exist. And I just hope that it creates a framework for something to look back onto at that time, and to continue to grow from that.
I think, looking 20 years into the future, for our project at the ranch, I hope we see a glorious revival in people reading books, and physical, printed things that have been made with care. I hope it's a place where people can learn to live in greater harmony with the world. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver. There's a line in one of her poems that's "Attention is the beginning of devotion." So that's something I think about a lot in our work. Slowing down. All these artists do it, obviously, in an incredibly thoughtful way. Curators do it. What do you show people? What do you highlight? What do you yourself choose to pay attention to? So I hope, it's a place where people understand how we're all interconnected more closely than we realize. And obviously that relates to cowboys, ranching, taking care of the land, all these different approaches to that. I hope people appreciate how beautiful that can be, and become sort of better citizens of the West and of the world, especially as we face, drought, climate change, more uncertain elements of the future.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being up here with us today. I would love to turn to the audience now and see if there's any questions that have bubbled up as we've been speaking.
And if there are, please let me pass you a mic so we can record it.
This would be directed to the two of you that spent time on ranches, but I'm curious if you could give us a characterization of a typical day in the life of a cowboy, starting from when they get up and when they go to bed.
So obviously I'm not tough enough to be a cowboy, and I dip my toe in every now and then. I can hang in there for a week at a time, but the experiences I've had working with real working cowboys have been a real wake up call to like just how much work can be done in a day. Um, I I grew up in Ohio, and I helped out on a couple dairy farms and some corn farms and soybean, and I'll never forget how hard those dairy farmers worked. The 4:30 a.m. wake up and you don't go to bed till 11, and that's every single day. And I think what's amazing about being out here is coming from the Midwest. It kind of feels like you centralize around a hub, around the barn. All of the work happens there for the most part, at least. And when you're out in the West, it feels like you go to the work. So, at least in my experience with cowboys, you're constantly moving. Everything's always moving, everything's always changing, and priorities are always shifting just according to what the animals need. But it's been really amazing to me, at least the cowboys that I've been able to spend a little bit more time with and interact more. The commonality between the three people that I'm thinking of right now is their ability to remain calm when shit hits the fan. Like truly, it's like that is their skill set, that they can remain calm when an animal gets injured, when an animal's freaking out, when things are going wrong. But really the work ethic that I've seen has been at least in my experience, it's been a 4:30 a.m. wake up in a cowboy pitch tent, 5 miles out into a pasture, and you're moving cattle all day and you're changing grazing pastures, and it's just constant physical movement throughout the day. Um, I've never slept better than when I pull a full shift with a cowboy. Like it is just a constant physicality that is just enduring. And I think that's something that has always amazed me with farmers, ranchers, is people's just ability to show strength when it is needed within their work. And that's been something that has blown me away in terms of cowboys.
Yeah, their endurance is just absurd. Some of the ranches that I've been to are, I think the largest one was 1.8 million acres, which I figured it out at one point. I think that if you combined Rhode Island and Delaware, it was roughly that size of just one ranch. I might be off on that, but it's in that neighborhood. So think about having to work cattle on a property that large. I mean, it's insane to think about. But I'll never forget the first time I went down to 4.6s in Texas. It was the first time that I went to a big outfit. Prior to that, I'd been on very small or smaller family outfits, and the sixes in the cowboy world, it's kind of like playing for the Yankees. It's like as good as it gets. And I was, pretty nervous going there. And the night before, I remember they said, I think they said, all right, breakfast is at 4. I'm like, okay, great. And I like wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I was, there to play ball and there to work. So I was like, I'm gonna be the first one in the tent. So I get in there at 3:30, and I'm thinking, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get in there, set up. Everyone will see me be the first one there. And I walk into the tent. Every single chair is already full. Every cowboy is in there already drinking coffee. Man, you go, they don't play around. So they had a big gather that day. So well, relatively large. They had to trot 10 miles to get to their cows, and then they had to push those cows into a corral, and then they had to sort all those cows. And then they had at least a 10-mile trot back to the main barn. And I mean, this is summer. It was incredibly hot. It was just a brutal day. And I'm thinking, I mean, I heard him say like, all right, let's go back to the barn to get some supper. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. We're going to go home, get some dinner, and then that'll be it. We get back to the barn, go to the tent. Everybody eats. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, I'm whooped, absolutely whooped. Well, it turns out supper is not supper. Supper is lunch. So they had, I mean, up to that point, I don't even know how many hours it was, but it was already more than a full day. So they did all that, ate supper, and then went back out and did, I forget what it was, like 4 or 5 more hours work, and then went back and ate actual dinner. and then went to bed. And, by that point it was, if they were going to bed at 10 and they got up at 3 or 3:30, I mean, that's a, and that was nothing. That was just like, oh yeah, okay, Tuesday, like it just, and everywhere you go, it's just like, holy shit, man, like the battery these guys have is just unbelievable. And a lot of the times you never see them eat, you never see them drink water. I've been on pretty large gathers where you're gone for 12 hours. They never take a sip of water. If they do, it's from like a freaking puddle in the ground or just some like disgusting looking stream. And, um, then there's winter where there's night calving and it's minus 30 and they're up all night taking care of baby calves all through the night after they worked all day. So it's just, yeah, I mean, it's absurd how they just go and go and go and go and go, but there's no typical day really. Yeah.
I'll also say, I don't know if this is you guys find this true, but one thing I'll say that's amazed me is the lack of willingness to retire. I mean, or just lack of, like, I mean, you can't really retire when you're, you have to keep working, but I will say the age range of cowboys has been something that's really amazed me. And, working with people that are as young as 16 and can handle horses better than anyone you've ever seen, and then working with someone who's 94 who still ropes. Like, it's an incredible thing that I think that once you become like a real cowboy, it just never, it's a part of who you are. And I've experienced some really incredible interactions with people that the toughness just doesn't end and that mentality never leaves, and they never, for better or for worse. And it's really cool to see.
Okay, well, let's do, if there's one more question, we'd love to hear one more question if there is anyone. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone on the panel. It was a lovely discussion. One thing I've been thinking a lot about personally is the increasing disconnect between us in an urban environment like Denver and our food and where that comes from. And especially on the meat front. I mean, we eat a ton of meat and none of us really know where it comes from unless you've had the experience that y'all have had. And that's resulted for a variety of reasons in big urban rural divide. And if you had one thing to take back from your experience in the rural West to this urban environment that would help the urban folks better understand what that really means to be out there and where our food and this mythos and everything actually comes from, what would that be?
This is tangentially related, I guess, just rural urban divide. To me, a big part of the cowboy culture myth image maybe is individualism. And that's obviously baked into the American experiment culturally a lot. We're rugged individuals as compared to a lot of countries and their cultural histories in the rest of the world. But I think they could probably all speak better than I can to that. But in rural areas, I think you get an appreciation for how much small towns band together, how important community is. That I think in some ways we do well also in urban areas, but could probably learn some of those elements of how to, engage your own family, engage your community, even in kind of a small footprint in an urban area with lots of people. So that idea of kind of like community engagement being key to sustaining, your community, your family, people that are important to you. That, yeah, I think that's something we can take from smaller rural areas.
That's a really tough question. And something I think about all the time. And the cowboy in general, I think, has been such a glamorized thing in society that people skate over the name itself, cowboy. They don't even really think much about it. They don't really think these are people that are raising cows to feed the entire world. I think it's become that numb, really. But as far as the answer of making people understand from urban areas, I don't have the answer, but I think it's if you could somehow force people to get out of the city and to spend time in these areas, it would at least help them understand, and it would help them slow down a little bit, and it would help them connect with the land. Because if you're just looking at pictures, it's hard. But and when you are out there, whether it's for a day or a week or whatever, I mean, it completely changes you. You know, there's no way that you can spend time in these places and not go home and be a different person. So I think that that would be a step. I don't know how realistic it is, but it would certainly help.
Uh, I think, well, so my family, I come from a farming family, and I've spent time on farms. I spent time on ranches. I spent time on ranches in Israel. And I think the biggest thing is the constant loss. Um, just loss of livestock, loss of land. Um, that I think that's when I think about ranches and farming, and where our food comes from is just loss after loss after loss. And that's something that we as consumers don't really think about. We're just like, oh, this is like this prime cut of steak. I'm so happy to have it. Or like we take advantage of how accessible this food is and um, how much of that food there is. When a rancher could have lost like half their livestock to disease or the cold, fire. So it's just, yeah, just relentless. Something's always going wrong. And I think that we just, as consumers, just take that for granted, and don't even think about it. So, yeah, we're good.
That's a really cool question, and it's a difficult one for sure. But I think whenever I come back from experiences that I have with ranchers or with the native community up north, or when I get to spend time around communities that have really built their lives around working with the land, I think one of the most helpful things that I can bring back is I'm very lucky in the sense that I get to work with ranchers and farmers that I really get to believe in the ethics behind their ranch and how they're building things and, the way they treat their livestock. And I get to be really involved in that. And I think people tend to forget that being a rancher is, yes, it can be a rough job. And of course, there's people doing a great job with it, people doing not so much. Like there's everything in between. But a lot of the people that I've been able to work with, I'm able to like surmise that basically these people are obsessive animal lovers, obsessed with land and taking care of it and stewardship. Um, and so I think that there is this ruggedness that comes along with cowboying and running cattle and everything that we tend to forget that at the end of the day, these people are caretakers for these animals. And yes, a lot of that is for processing. And so we can eat at the end of the day. But if you're able to work with these ethical, wonderful people that are doing everything they can to, build a system that not only works for them, their families, the land, and their community, I can bring that information back to my friends and connect them with places that they might not ever feel comfortable reaching out to otherwise. And just having people recognize that, like, yes, there is a barrier to entry here, but everyone can get involved with a farm or a ranch. Like there's local opportunities, there's nonprofits, and just trying to let people know that it is accessible. If you want to be involved, you can. You just have to seek it out.
Well, I just wanted to thank all of you so much for being with us today, for your beautiful physical art that you're bringing into the world. Land Library, this is a living art installation that I'm so excited to watch grow. We do have the Land Library popped up a collection in the back if you'd like to spend time with some of the titles. And we also invite you to take some of the Mad Agriculture journals home with you. Our most recent issue does feature Ian's work if you'd like to take some of that with you. And a lot of the pieces that he has here at the show are also in the journal. Big round of applause for our panelists, and thank you so much for being with us today.